Hey folks, how's it going? Chris here from MoDXtra Games and Collectibles. It's time for a collector's thoughts on the sofa. This is when I sit anywhere but on a sofa, although I am on a comfy chair today, and just do a bit more of a freestyle chat on a subject or a theme that's been on my mind, something I've been thinking about, and then invite you to head down to the comments below and share your thoughts and opinions and commentary on the question of the day or the thought of the day. And you know, nothing more complicated than that. And I want to talk G.I. Joe Classified series today. I'm a bit late with this video. I meant to put it out in June as like part of my Yojo June focus, and I just didn't get round to it. To be perfectly honest, it's been a difficult one to kind of pin down and articulate and get the thoughts together on, but I'm going to give it a try. And that question is, what is G.I. Joe Classified when it comes to the characters and their visual identities? And by that, I mean, is it a bit confused as a line with regards to whether it's reinterpretation, a new generation, as Lenny would say, with characters that have been reinterpreted, modern reinterpretation in Classified, or is it just 6-inch classifiedized vintage retread, you know? So sometimes you get characters that are heavily inspired by the OG vintage figure or the OG character from, you know, the old comic books or something. And then sometimes you get a character and it's been reinterpreted and classifiedized. And it's all a bit muddled up. And I think I might be a little bit inconsistent in terms of how favourably I do or don't review figures based on those two kind of buckets, the reinterpreted bucket or the retro vintage style bucket. If we take Night Creeper, one of my recent reviews on the channel, I even said, I think, to vaguely quote myself, that could almost be, you know, that's fully vintage inspired. That is a modern classifiedized interpretation of the vintage look character. Yes, it's 6-inch scale, so it's got the 6-inch and modern generation sculpting and, you know, paint technology and articulation technology and all that stuff. But ultimately, that is just classic look, vintage, OG, even down to the loadout and the colour selection and everything. Whereas if you look at the likes of Doc and Jinx that I've recently reviewed on the channel, yeah, there's a sniff, there's a whiff around the figure of the vintage inspiration. You can smell the classic look in there. Obviously then you've got the elements I mentioned before, you know, it's 6-inch scale and it's in the modern age. So you've got the 6-inch articulation, 6-inch sculpting, the new paint technology, etc., etc. But they've reinterpreted him a little bit by throwing a vest on and doing a couple of other bits. Jinx is even more the case with the you know, the change in the sleeves and the addition of the tattoo, and you know, they got rid of the 80s mullet, which is not a problem. But the ninja head doesn't have, like, you know, the head mask isn't very in line with the vintage style of the figure. And don't get me wrong, you know, they still maintain the presence of the key sort of visual identifying features of the character. You know, Jinx has still got the red get-up, the loadout's still there, it's still a ninja-style design. They're not going wildly outfield from where the core heart, the core inspiration point is. But she is a reinterpretation. She's not just been modernised. She's not just a 6-inch scale modernised version of Jinx. She's also reinterpreted. And I notice in my comments, some people jump in like, yeah, looks good, but nah, I'll wait for the retro. You know, Jinx was a great example of that. A couple of folks saying, oh, I'll wait and see. They're inevitably going to do a fully sleeved one that looks more like the original movie look of the character, you know, like it, but I'll wait for the retro. Or sometimes I'll get comments going, oh, I love what they've done with this. What a great interpretation. They've really, like, up to the feel of this character, or I like what they've done with this tweaked look or this new look. And so it's all a bit confused. You know, it's all a bit confused. And I'm not sure we, as the consumers of G.I. Joe Classified, as the fans of G.I. Joe Classified, I'm not sure we entirely know what we want either. Now, around this narrative, there's something about implementation. You know, Doc, I said, oh man, I wish they hadn't bothered with the vest. I would have just liked a good classic looking Doc with the full, you know, the full shirt on view, not into the flat jacket. You know, right from the beginning, I said it about Flint, for example. So clearly in that instance, I wanted a vintage inspired version of the character. Or Duke, you know, I sat tight and waited for the retro release so that I had one that looked like really classic, traditional, historical, nostalgia-inspiring Duke look rather than the, you know, the modernised update. But the Dreadnoks, for example, not Torch, I've not got Torch yet, but Ripper and Zorana, yeah, love the modernisation of those, the more reinterpreted style. Again, to be clear, I get that the core identifying features of the characters are there, but like Zorana's new hairdo, I mean, they even chucked in a retro hair swap, didn't they? So you could still do the vintage version, but the Zorana's hairdo and the kind of look and feel of her design, or Torch, where I mean, the colour scheme's different, you know, not Torch, I keep saying Torch, Ripper, they've moved away from the core colour scheme and outfit, you know. So how are they supposed to navigate that if someone like me is on the one hand sometimes saying, oh, I wish it just looked like it used to, I just want an updated version of this, please, and then on the other hand I'm saying, no, you could have done something new and different with that, why didn't you explore a new space with with this character? It's like, damned if they do, damned if they don't. Now what confuses things a little bit more is the introduction of the retro line, which I generally, you know, when I tag them up on, put the titles on them on YouTube, I call it a G.I. Joe Classified review, but technically it's not, it's G.I. Joe Retro. But it's even more confused, because if you take like, so the Night Creeper that I was talking about before, that could have basically been a retro release. I don't see anything about that figure, and please do, you know, drop in the comments and say, well, Chris, you know, except for like your proper, well, actually fine detail magnifying glass kind of bollocks, but broadly speaking, that could have been a retro release. So if and when they ever do get around to releasing a Night Creeper as a retro release, it's just going to be a slight recolor, isn't it? Stalker, it was just a recolor, just a more retro class inspired recolor, you know? But Duke and Scarlet, whole new figures, resculpts, you know? So then should they, in the main line, be doing heavily nostalgically inspired figures, or should they be doing reinterpreted, modern reinterpretations of the figures? Because you could argue, like if I think of the stuff, I'm just casting my eye over the shelf of the stuff I've got out right now. If I look at the Techno Viper, very heavily nostalgically inspired. Night Creeper, very heavily nostalgically inspired. Norgahide, very heavily nostalgically inspired. Jinx, reinterpretation. You know, it's all a bit, I don't know, confused. I'm not sure am I getting this across, what I'm trying to say? I'm not sure I'm kind of putting it out there in a very structured way today. So the real question at hand, outside, you know, what is G.I. Joe Classified? Is it, you know, a nostalgia line that's being modernised in the 6-inch scale with modern technology, or is it a new generation of characters, as Lenny has often described it on stream? You know, the question then comes down to, what do we want? What do we want as a fan base? You know, how do they navigate through our wants, needs and desires? There's certainly some implication or some speculation that the movement more into more classic vintage inspired looks and feels around the characters was driven by early feedback of the more, the more they strayed away from the vintage look. And did some of the more science fiction-y style things, you know, that they responded to that feedback and reconfigured. But then, you know, I would say like Major Blood as one of the great examples of an outstanding. You know, I love the reinterpretation, the kind of new generation reinterpretation of Major Blood. That figure is awesome. You know, again, all the core like identifying features, the heart of the character is there, but looks and feels great, you know? So even back in those earlier waves, if that feedback was the case and they like kind of reconfigured direction, there were still examples of excellent work taking place there. I mean, ultimately, largely speaking, most of them are sort of a mix of the two, aren't they, that they're putting out now? They go for a starting point that is the nostalgically inspired vintage look, and then they just bolt on a few bits. I mean, Doc is probably an example of that, isn't he? Because to all intents and purposes, he is just a classic look vintage figure. Although, didn't the classic one have a mortar? I remembered that rightly. Sometimes I check on Yo-Joe before I open my mouth, but I'm freestyling today. Freestyler. Yeah, they just slap the vest on with some other bits to kind of add to your man-child play experience. Which, incidentally, I don't think it does. I'm not sure. I'm not a fan of these interchangeable pouch vest things. The two examples of it have not landed well with me, but that's a side note. Yeah, so that's it really. I'll bring it I'll wrap the thought up there. As usual, I've got no like actual conclusion to it. I was just reflecting on it, and when I review the reviews I do on YouTube, and I think, well, I was bigging it up because of the reinterpretation on this one, but I was complaining that it wasn't modernised enough on this one. But then I was really into the fact that it was old school vintage look on this one. I'm up and down, I'm inconsistent. I think ultimately the conclusion is go in any direction, Lenny and your team, just as long as it looks fucking cool. I think, it's just got to look fucking cool. You know what I mean? And the Naugahyde aesthetic, love that. I was actually more aggrieved by the reuse of the old book with the stupid pointy boots. Or narrow boots, I should say. So yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe that is just the conclusion of this thought that, talking it out for 10, 12 minutes, that's where I'm at. It doesn't matter. It could be either, as long as it just looks fucking cool. But then the whole retro thing throws a spanner in the works, doesn't it? Because then people are just going to say, well, I'll wait until the retro release. But if the mainline one is basically a retro version, then how do you wait? Or do they just want us to buy both versions? Or I don't know. The fact that there's a retro parallel line makes it all a bit more confusing. Like, what is G.I. Joe Classified? Retro is actually quite clearly defined, isn't it? But what is G.I. Joe Classified? Well, anyway, I'll not go on too much longer, but in order to help me come to some conclusion, I'll once again invite you guys to head down to the comments below and share your thoughts. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Have you got some contribution to make to the thought process that I'm going through? What do you think G.I. Joe Classified is? Do you prefer vintage look, modernised 6-inch figures, or do you want more of a reinterpretation or a newer generation interpretation? Where do you sit with it? Or are you like me, you just, you kind of flip-flop and sit in the middle because you just want it to look cool, all that good stuff. Thanks for sitting with me when I edit it down, because there was a few pauses and stuff and a burp. I'll edit the burp out for you. Probably about 12, 13 minutes of me just rambling on in an unstructured way with no clear definition. And that's obviously entertaining. So cheers, folks. See you next time.